3 weeks ago, I typed my very first line of code and made a little rocket game, a barbarian tower defense game, and a sci-fi FPS shooter game. And this is the beginning of my journey to becoming a game developer. Hello, and welcome to my show. It's been so long, but today I'm going to talk about my first little baby steps into the game developing world. I started learning how to code on June 17th, and all 3 games I learned are from a Udemy course, so I'll just be using the names from said course. This first game is called Project Boost, and you just use the arrow keys or WASD to fly off the launching pad and try and land the rocket on the little green landing pad while avoiding obstacles along the way. So I kind of forgot to record most of the making of this game, so I'll just go through the process that I did end up recording. I first made a cylinder able to hover like a rocket, made my first 3 levels, which I tried to progressively make harder, so this one you can just easily go over the obstacle, but this one you have to stay within the bounds of the ceiling, which ends up in every level later as this border background that I made, and I ended up making the actual background more and more complex, but it just kind of turned into looking like teeth by the end. I just wanted some extra pizzazz for the background, okay? Also, I made a little rocket that has me colors. And it's kind of funny that the victory particles are also kind of me colors because they were just a downloadable resource, but they have the blue, the gold, and the white. But anyway, that is Project Boost, my very first little game, which only took me about 2 days to make, while the next one took me like 4. This next game is a tower defense game called Barbarian Blasters, and it was a whole lot more complex than Project Boost was. I first started with blocking out the level. The path is what the enemy's route will be to get to the castle base later, and the white squares are the free spaces where the turrets can be placed. I first made a placeholder capsule of the enemy, and it slowly but surely follows the path to where the base is, which I made next, and I gave it 5 HP. Each enemy does 1 damage, so I had to add more enemies to actually test the game over and restart the level. Then I made a placeholder cannon turret and gave it projectiles, but they just shoot straight ahead. Even though that's kind of satisfying, I did have to make the turret follow and shoot in the direction of the enemies. And since I needed to make the projectiles do damage, I made an infinite wave of enemies to test everything out, since the enemies go down in only 2 hits. But of course you can't just place turrets down all willy-nilly, so now it costs 100 gold to place a turret, but the enemies were still way too easy to defeat, so then I learned how to make the difficulty increase over time by increasing the enemy spawn rate, but this quickly gets out of hand. So I made the waves of enemies stop spawning after 30 seconds and gave them better health as the 30 seconds go on, but since their health gets too high towards the end, I couldn't get enough gold to defeat them all, but there's still a victory screen for at least winning the level. I then learned how to add a star rating to the victory, so getting 1 star means you just survived, getting 2 stars means you survived with full health, and getting all 3 stars means you survived with full health and you still have a decent amount of gold left over. Then it was finally time to make the level look all nice and pretty, so I added the real castle-based barbarians and turrets to the scene. Sadly, I didn't make any of these myself. I got them as resources from the Udemy course, same with all the trees and the rocks that I filled the rest of the level with, that I also forgot to record. But this concludes the making of Barbarian Blasters, which was a blast in itself. At this point, I was learning quite a lot, but sadly I could start feeling my brain turn into mush, and it really shows in the next and final game. Last but certainly not least, this game is called Robo Rampage, and it's an FPS shooter game. This one took me about 5 days to complete, but I actually could have finished it in 4 because placing all the decoration assets around took me so long, and I had to take a break and finish it the next day. But I really wanted this one to look the best because it's the most complicated one I had to do. So this one is going to be a bit of a doozy. Of course, we start off with the cube of ground and the capsule of character, and then the camera went where the capsule's face would be to become the first person view. And then I had to make a testing area to do, some testing. So I added some parkour areas just in case I had to add some platforming to the final level, which actually didn't even really happen. So this just turned into a funny little parkour area in the end. I added another capsule as an enemy, but this one actually has navigation skills, unlike the Barbarians, which ended up making it practically impossible to get away from them, especially when I added the funny looking attack animation. So that's when the weapons came into play, but I don't really care for shooter games and even like guns in general. So all I can tell you is that this fast shooting one is an SMG, which I'm assuming means machine gun, the MG part, but I don't know what the S stands for. I'm going to assume like standard or small in this case, or media. Okay, I got my composure back. Next. Next, I made a game over screen for when you get defeated by the funny little capsule. And the shader editor really reminds me of making node-based materials in Blender, which in general, a lot of Godot really reminds me of Blender, so it was really nice already knowing a few things right when I opened Godot for the first time, right? But the shader editor was used to make the background blurry when getting a game over. Next up was adding a rifle, which was semi-automatic, I think? I don't remember what the instructor fully said, but this one you can't just hold down the shoot button, you have to click every time you want to shoot it. And the rifle does a whole lot more damage than the SMG. The SMG only does like 15, I think, while the rifle does 70, so you can kill the enemy in like, I think 5 hits, compared to the rifle that only takes 2 hits. So in the bottom right corner, you can see the SMG has a whole lot more bullets than the rifle to keep it balanced. Now all that needs to be done is making an actual playable level, which needs to be blocked out first, but since I didn't want to use the layout the Udemy resource had, I made my own, but since it wasn't like modeling in Blender, it took me a couple of hours just to block out everything properly. And the sad part is I forgot to make everything to scale, so once I did block everything out, I put the character scene in the final level scene, and I had to both scale up all the rooms and make the corridors taller because the player capsule was a lot bigger than I remembered, and that took me like 1 or 2 more hours. But then I took the enemy robot model from the resources and plopped it in the scene, and I gave it a spin attack animation, which will be seen later on. But the animation that was taught in the course was making the robot practically like ram head first into the player, which is kind of jacked up. So I made my own that I think fits better since it has little fans on both of the sides anyway. So I feel like spinning is just as lethal. Then, since my boyfriend likes shooter games, I gave him this blocked out version, which is the footage that's playing right now, because I didn't want to play it myself first for this footage, because I already knew where all the enemies and ammo were located. Which, now that I'm thinking about it, I didn't talk about ammo, did I? So there's ammo pickups. It's the spinning cubes that's randomly around the level, and the blue one gives the SMG 60 more bullets, while the red one gives the rifle 10 more bullets. And I hid 2 in the little sneaky corridor in the biggest room towards the end, if you saw that while I was blocking out the level. Anyway, back on track. Overall, what I found out while he was playing was there were a couple of enemies that saw the player before they were supposed to, so I changed the length of one of the corridors later to fix one of those problems, and I made the sneaky little corridor slightly slimmer so the enemy in there wouldn't be able to actually fly out and attack before you're supposed to see it. I also noticed that enemies would get stuck on the corners of ramps, but thankfully I learned how to fix that from the course later on. So, to add a bit more difficulty, I got to learn how to make a lava shader and put some lava pits around my level where it was way too easy to run across the whole room, and the gap that's in the final room was always meant to be for a tiny little bit of lava parkour. And now the footage that's playing this time is me running around my own game to make sure I placed all the ramps and lava properly, and also making sure the enemies could actually come around the corners easily now. I was also checking for any discrepancies in the rooms and also like the corridors layout, which I did find a few that ever so slightly made gaps in the floor or like a gap connecting to a ramp, so I fixed all those too. It was just because I didn't have the snapping feature on, so I accidentally moved it like a millimeter away, like what, a centimeter, not even like an inch away. Anyways, then finally, it was time to decorate the entire level. which took me practically a whole day because I was pretty tired from other things that I had to get done that week anyways. So I started by placing down these floor panel things in all the big empty floor spots, but later on I ended up resizing some of them so they can go in even more areas that I thought were also pretty sparse. Then I filled out the starting room first by adding a few small floor tiles. I added some pipes and some vents, then some support beams in every corner. I added a couple of monitors in there too because I just kind of think of them as like keypads to open up other doors or something. Then there was this item called pillar in the resources, but the instructor just added it as a wall decoration, like if you had a sci-fi looking wallpaper. So I added a couple of those in the starting room too. Then, going to the other rooms, I started with the support beams. I placed one in every freaking corner, I'm pretty sure, which took so long, but I wanted some extra pizzazz in the big room, so I added a whole wall of supports, which I mean, it looks good, but it took me like 30 or 40 minutes to make them as even as I possibly could with like barely any brain power left. Then I added the pillar wall decoration thing and added those to every room too, which resulted in practically the same thing as the supports in a couple of rooms, but it did add a good bit of wall pizzazz. Also, by the way, I like using the word pizzazz, I think it sounds funny. Next was floor pizzazz by adding the small floor tiles literally everywhere. Literally everywhere, in every room, in every corridor. I don't know, there might be a few at the bottom of the lava pit, who knows? Anyway, after all of that, I started working on adding the extra wall objects to the final room, because at this point, I was slightly wanting to just kind of end it there and stop decorating since it was taking me so long. But since I don't like to put in like half effort of something that I know that I would 100% do if I had the energy, I was just tired, I did take like an hour or two break, and I came back and I started adding more stuff to the rest of the rooms, like ceiling pizzazz. So there were these round objects that were just labeled caps in the resources, and I put those on the ceilings in every room. Then I took the pipes, vents, and the monitors and added a bunch of those in every room too. And at last, here comes the actual lights, which I gave a nice blue hue to complement the blueness that was happening with the rest of the resources I was provided. I put a few in every room, and they also line every corridor. But now, for the final run through I made. So first off, since blue is my literal favorite freaking color of all time, I appreciated the amount of blueness that was around me. But I didn't like that the lights had a specific place, so when I would run by a light, it would cast the capsule shadow in front of me, which was kind of annoying, but I don't know how to fix that. So I continued on, and for the most part, everything worked exactly as expected, and also looked exactly as expected. Except for the sneaky corridor, so I went back and spruced that up a bit later. But other than that, everything looked good. It's ta-da! That's it for my first 3 games made in Godot 4, specifically 4.1.1 to follow the course exactly. But it was a heck of a journey for 2 weeks, but I can actually see myself being able to confidently code eventually, and I hope that the idea of me making my own game actually becomes a real thing, and it turns out really cool, and a hiccup, and people really like it, and they say like, oh wow, Sally, what a cool game. What a cool game you made, wowie. But I'll be back sometime with the same 3 games, but actually making them my own, meaning like fully understanding how to code in Godot and adding like my own extra flair or differences to each one. Like, take Robo Rampage, it'll still be an FPS shooter, sure, but it's not gonna be, you know, gun-based and robot-based. I'm gonna make my own enemy in Blender whenever I freaking relearn how to do that for the 6th time, oh my goodness. And my own like weapons and pickups and area and stuff. I don't know what exactly it'll be yet. I need to like do some random idea like brainstorming, yeah, but someday I shall be back. But anyway, that's all for now. I hope you enjoyed the video and maybe even got inspired to learn something new yourself. Okay, bye.